My own sister stole the love of my life. It wasn't a stranger, not some woman I could hate from a safe distance. It was my sister, the girl I grew up with, the one I braided hair with on Sunday mornings, the one who cried in my arms after her first heartbreak. I trusted her with everything, including him. His name was Daniel. For 30 years, he was my husband, my partner, the man I thought I would grow old with. We raised children together, buried our parents together, built a home that echoed with laughter and late-night arguments and reconciliations. He wasn't perfect, but he was mine, or so I thought. The betrayal revealed itself slowly, like a crack in glass, spreading wider every day. At first, it was little things. Phone calls that ended when I walked into the room, my sister helping him with errands that somehow never included me, her perfume lingering faintly on his shirts when he came home. I told myself I was imagining it. What kind of man betrays his wife with her own sister? What kind of sister crosses that line? One evening, I walked into the kitchen to find them standing too close together. His hand brushed hers as she reached for a glass. Their eyes met in a way that made my stomach twist. I cleared my throat, and they sprang apart like guilty teenagers. He mumbled something about work stress. She smiled, that tight little smile she always used when she thought she was smarter than me. The final blow came the night he packed a suitcase. He didn't even try to hide it. "I'm leaving," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. And when I asked where he was going, he whispered her name, my sister's name. I can't describe the silence that followed. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was erasure. 30 years of marriage, 3 children, decades of sacrifice, all tossed aside for the woman who once shared my bedroom as a child, my own blood. How could she do this to me? How could he? But here's what they didn't know. I'm not a woman who breaks quietly. They thought I would crumble, that I would let them write me out of my own story. They underestimated the years I spent holding this family together, the strength I buried beneath politeness and compromise. What they took from me was unforgivable. But what I took back, well, that's the part of the story they never saw coming. The first weeks after Daniel left were a blur. Every corner of the house reminded me of him, of us. The chair where he used to read the paper, the garden we planted together, even the smell of coffee in the morning felt like betrayal. Because it was his routine, his ritual. And yet, what cut deepest was knowing he wasn't making that coffee alone anymore. He was making it for her. My sister, Margaret, had always been jealous of my marriage, of my home, even of the way my children loved me. She was the kind who smiled sweetly to your face, then found ways to remind you she thought she deserved more. Still, I never imagined she would take him. The gossip spread quickly. Small towns are merciless. Neighbors whispered. Friends stopped calling. At church, the looks weren't of pity. They were of curiosity, even entertainment. My humiliation had become their Sunday discussion. The children were divided. Emily, my eldest, stood firmly with me. She called her father a coward and refused to visit him. But Michael, our son, struggled. He loved his father and adored his aunt. When he visited them, he came back quieter, conflicted, unable to look me in the eye. And Anna, our youngest, barely spoke at all, retreating into silence. Every time I thought the pain couldn't go deeper, it did. One afternoon, I received a letter from the bank. Daniel had moved money out of our joint account, not just a little, thousands, enough to make me wonder how long this had been planned. How many nights had they whispered together, plotting a future that erased me? For weeks, I felt like I was drowning. But then something shifted. Maybe it was Emily's fierce loyalty or Anna's quiet eyes watching me, waiting to see how her mother would stand. Or maybe it was simply survival. But I decided that if they thought I was finished, they had another thing coming. I began to watch, to listen, to collect pieces of information that seemed harmless on their own, but painted a picture when strung together. Receipts left crumpled in his old coat pocket. Posts Margaret made on social media, flaunting new jewelry she couldn't possibly afford. A conversation overheard between Michael and his father about the new house they were buying together. They thought they were building a new life. I was about to dismantle it brick by brick. The first step was subtle. I hired a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but a woman known for her ruthless precision in divorce and property cases. She told me things Daniel had counted on me never knowing, like the fact that half of everything he tried to move was still legally mine. Like the fact that our home, the one he had walked out of, could not be touched without my consent. Like the fact that adultery, especially with a family member, could still carry legal weight in our state. Next came the finances. I began to quietly shift accounts to protect what was mine and what my children would need. While they flaunted their new beginning, I secured the foundation beneath my feet. But revenge isn't only about survival. It's about justice. And I wanted them both to feel the weight of what they had done. So I waited. I let Margaret parade him around town. I let her wear the diamonds he bought with money siphoned from our savings. I let them believe they had won. Because what's sweeter than revenge served cold? Revenge served in plain sight, with the whole town watching. The breaking point came at Thanksgiving. For years, my home had been the center of our family gatherings. That year, Margaret insisted on hosting in her new house, the house Daniel had partially bought with our money. Against my better judgment, I went. Emily begged me not to, but I needed to see them together. I needed to feel the fire that would keep me moving. The table was set lavishly, almost gaudy. Margaret sat at the head, Daniel at her side. When I arrived, conversations faltered, eyes darted. I knew they didn't expect me to come. She smiled as though she'd won a prize, motioning for me to sit at the far end. But I didn't. Instead, I placed a folder on the table. Inside were photographs, bank records, and legal documents. Proof of their affair. Proof of the money Daniel had stolen. Proof that the house they sat in wasn't truly theirs. The silence was electric. Daniel's face turned white. Margaret sputtered excuses. The children looked from me to them, realization dawning. "I hope the turkey tastes good," I said softly, "because it's the last holiday you'll celebrate in this house." And I meant it. What followed wasn't quick. Legal battles never are. But with every court date, every discovery, the cracks in their fantasy widened. The house was repossessed. Assets were frozen. Their reputations, once carefully maintained, crumbled as the truth became public record. And me? I didn't just survive. I rebuilt. I poured energy into my own life, into my daughter's, into creating a future that wasn't defined by what had been taken, but by what I had reclaimed. In the end, Daniel and Margaret had each other, but what they didn't have was respect, security, or the family they thought they could control. They got the hollow shell of a victory built on lies. And I walked away with everything that truly mattered: my dignity, my strength, and the knowledge that I had turned betrayal into power. But to understand how I planned it all, how I turned their cruelty into their downfall, you need to hear the rest of the story. I was 70 the autumn they betrayed me, a grandmother of 3, Lila with her missing front tooth, Theo with the cowlick that never lay flat, and baby James, who wrapped his whole fist around my finger and fell asleep. People think women soften with age. We don't. We refine. Grief burns away what isn't essential. What remained in me was sharper than they remembered. In the quiet after Thanksgiving, I walked the neighborhood loop I'd traced for decades, past maples already bare, past Mrs. Duffy's porch with its plastic pumpkins. Each step steadied my breathing. By the time I returned, a plan had taken root. Not rage, not petty sabotage, something cleaner. I would take back what was mine, and I would do it so precisely that no one could call it cruelty, only consequence. I met my attorney, Ruth Navarro, in a small office that smelled faintly of lemon oil and paper. She was a compact woman with iron gray hair and the kind of calm you want in a storm. I told her everything: dates, amounts, the diamond bracelet Margaret had started flashing at church, the cash withdrawals that lined up with it. She listened without interrupting, then slid a legal pad toward me. "Write a timeline," she said. "Accuracy is leverage." I filled 3 pages. She nodded and explained the path forward in simple pieces: temporary orders to freeze accounts, discovery to trace the money, a request for exclusive use of the marital home, and, if necessary, fault grounds that still mattered in our state. I went home and made soup for Anna, who had started coming by after class, to sit at the counter and stir without speaking. She was 27, newly accepted to a graduate program in counseling, and heartbreak made her forgetful. I handed her a spoon and said, "This is not the end of our family. This is the end of a lie." Michael arrived that Sunday, hands jammed into his coat pockets, the same boy who once broke a window and tried to fix it with clear tape. He stood in the doorway, eyes glassy. "Mom, Dad says you're turning everyone against him." "I'm turning the lights on," I said. "What he trips over in daylight is his doing." He stared at the floor. "Aunt Margaret says you've always looked down on her." I laughed once. Dry, surprised at the sound. "When you build a life, Michael, there isn't time to look down on anyone. You're too busy laying the next brick." He nodded, but I could see the tug in him, the old habit of choosing the easier storyteller. I didn't argue. I was done pleading for belief. The first court hearing landed 2 weeks before Christmas. The judge granted the restraining orders on the accounts and admonished Daniel's attorney about the sudden transfers. We walked out into the brittle air, and Ruth squeezed my elbow. "Paper trails don't lie," she said. "We'll find the rest." We did. Hidden in a shell company Margaret had opened, Barn Willow Holdings, fanciful as a greeting card, were payments for the down payment on her new house, purchases at a boutique jeweler, and a series of cash withdrawals that matched deposit slips into a separate account in Daniel's name. The signatures were Daniel's, sloppy and rushed. On two forms, mine was forged. The bank manager went white when Ruth showed him the originals. I did not shout. I did not smash plates. I sat in my kitchen with my grandchildren drawing with stubby crayons while my daughter Emily read aloud the judge's next order, a temporary injunction against any sale or encumbrance of property purchased with marital funds, and a mandate to return misappropriated amounts pending final division. "Does that mean Aunt Margaret loses the house?" Lila asked, looking up, a purple streak on her cheek. "It means grown-ups have to follow rules," I said, "even when they don't want to." Word spread again, as it always does. This time, the whispering had a different pitch. A week later, I found a note on my porch in familiar looping handwriting, my sister's. No apology, only a demand that I stop humiliating the family. I folded it once and dropped it into a folder labeled Evidence. The next months were a careful choreography, subpoenas sent and answered, depositions scheduled, truth pulled like thread from a sweater. Daniel's story shifted under oath. Margaret's hardened in all the wrong places. Ruth warned me, gently, that the process would not fix betrayal. "Courts divide assets," she said. "They don't stitch hearts." I understood. The sewing would be mine to do. On a gray Tuesday in February, I received a call from an old neighbor, Mrs. Duffy, the one with the plastic pumpkins and the kind of eyes that miss nothing. "Honey," she began, voice low with the gravity she saved for funerals and tornado warnings. "They're planning an engagement party at the country club. Your sister, with your husband. Well, you know." I thanked her and hung up. Snow feathered the windows. The kettle clicked off. A thought arrived so softly it felt like memory. If they wanted a spectacle, I could oblige, but the stage would be mine. I called Ruth. "Is there any reason I can't hold a family meeting?" "Not if you're careful," she said. "Record your own conversations. Do not trespass. Tell the truth." "Always," I said. I spent a week assembling a different kind of timeline. Photographs from the early years, the deed to our first home, the receipt for the second-hand crib Daniel insisted we could fix together, the hand-drawn Mother's Day card from Michael in 1993 that read, "You keep us safe." I added the recent papers to the back, the bank trail, the forged forms, the injunctive orders, past and present, side by side, like looking both ways before crossing. Emily offered to host. "Neutral ground," she said, "and I'll make sure no one throws anything." She was my steel, soft voice, unbending spine. Anna baked lemon bars and set out napkins in careful squares. Michael texted that he might be late. He arrived first. He looked older than 32 allows. He hugged me so hard my ribs protested. "Mom," he said into my shoulder, "I've been wrong." "Then be right now," I said. "It's all any of us can do." Daniel and Margaret entered together without knocking. He had lost weight. She had gained an audience even when there were only 5 of us in the room. Her perfume arrived before she did. I thought of all the times I'd told her as girls to go easy on the spray, that a whisper was better than a shout. She never learned to whisper. What is this? Margaret looked around at the photographs on the credenza. A museum? It's a map, I said, for people who've forgotten where they started. Daniel wouldn't sit. He stood near the door, fingers worrying his wedding band, the band he had asked to keep until things settle, as if vows were a hat you could hang by the door and grab again on your way out. I pressed the recorder app on my phone and placed it on the table. I'm recording this, I said, for clarity. Margaret rolled her eyes. Do you think we're going to perform? You already are, Emily said quietly from the kitchen doorway. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I laid out the papers in order and spoke like a docent, guiding tourists through a gallery. Here is our mortgage, paid off because I took an extra job the year Michael broke his arm and we couldn't afford the medical bills. Here is the joint savings account we opened when Anna was born. Here are the withdrawals you made in June, Daniel. Here are the deposits into Barn Willow Holdings. Here are the forged signatures. Here is the injunction. Here is the photograph of you, Margaret, wearing a bracelet paid for with those funds. Here is what consequence looks like. Daniel's mouth opened and closed. I thought, my attorney said, your attorney didn't forge my name, I said. Margaret laughed, a brittle sound. Do you want money? Is that it? You always did love pretending you were better than the rest of us while clipping coupons. I want the truth to touch daylight, I said. And then I want my peace. Michael leaned forward. Aunt Margaret, why did you tell me Mom used Dad for money? She shrugged. Because it's true. Emily set a tray of glasses on the table with a clatter that made everyone jump. Mom paid for my student loans when Dad said no. She sold her piano. You can call that using if you like. I call it loving. Daniel's shoulders sagged. For a moment, I saw the boy I married, earnest, frightened of his own selfishness. He looked at me. I don't know how to go back. You don't, I said. You go forward differently. Margaret hissed. Don't you dare grovel, Daniel. He sank into a chair as if the hiss had deflated him. I slid 2 envelopes across the table. These are settlement options. One is generous. The other is what the court will most likely award given the evidence. You can choose. Margaret snatched the first, skimmed it, went pale, and tossed it aside. You're trying to humiliate us. No, I said. You did that yourselves. I'm trying to end this without more bleeding. Daniel lifted the second envelope, read silently, then closed his eyes. What happens if I sign? You keep your pension split as the law requires. You return the diverted funds with interest. You forgo any claim to this house. In exchange, I do not pursue criminal charges for the forged forms. We file the divorce jointly, citing irreconcilable differences. We protect the children from further spectacle. And Margaret? Emily asked, voice like a bell. Margaret can keep anything she bought with her own money, I said, which from the paperwork appears to be 3 scarves and a set of wine glasses. Anna choked on a lemon bar and then, for the first time in months, laughed. It was the laugh of a child who realizes monsters shrink when you turn on the lamp. They did not sign that night. People rarely choose decency on the first pass. But 3 days later, Daniel came alone to Ruth's office and signed. He cried once, quietly, messily, like a man at the end of an old play who finally hears his own lines. Then he stood, shook Ruth's hand, and left. Margaret did not sign anything. She called me 3 times in one afternoon, left messages that swung from pleading to poison. I saved them all. When the country club invitation arrived, cream card, gold script, engagement celebration, I set it on the counter and made tea. I would not attend. I would not stand in a room where air had to struggle to find decency. But I would not waste an opportunity either. Ruth filed a motion to convert the temporary injunction into a permanent equitable lien against any property Margaret acquired with funds traced to the marital estate. The hearing landed the Friday before the party. The judge, stern and tired like all men who have seen too much human folly, signed the order at 3:12 p.m. At 4:00 p.m., a process server, kind eyes, efficient stride, walked into the country club's foyer while Margaret supervised a florist building an arch of white roses. He asked for her name. She lifted her chin and gave it, full and bright. He handed her the papers and said, "You've been served. I know this because Mrs. Duffy's cousin works the desk at the club and called Mrs. Duffy, who then called me, breathless with the kind of gossip that isn't gossip at all, but community accounting." By sundown, Margaret knew that the house she boasted about, the one she curated like a museum for better people, was now the collateral for her own decisions. I did not celebrate. I baked bread for Anna's classmates and watched the dough rise, patient and inevitable. Justice often looks like yeast, quiet, alive, expanding until it changes everything it touches. The engagement party did not go as planned. The club manager called me the next day, embarrassed. "We had an incident," he said. "Your sister caused a scene, accused the staff of conspiring with you. I'm afraid we had to ask them to leave." I thanked him and sent a check to cover the staff's trouble. Winter softened. Court dates came and went, each one unspooling another yard of thread. We divided property, we assigned debts, we wrote new titles and canceled old ones. On the day the divorce was final, I wore the blue dress I'd saved from my 40th anniversary, the one I never got to wear because he'd worked late that night and I'd eaten cake with the kids on the living room floor. The clerk stamped the papers and slid them back with a practiced kindness that made my throat ache. When I stepped outside, the sky had shifted into that tender hour between afternoon and evening. Emily was waiting by the curb. She took my hand. "What now?" "Now we live," I said. Living did not mean forgetting. It meant choosing. I sold the big house with its memories that snagged like burrs and bought a smaller place near the river with wide windows and a porch perfect for reading aloud. I planted herbs and a lemon tree in a pot that I wheeled inside when frost threatened. I found work I loved again, helping other women my age sort out paperwork they dreaded, sitting at kitchen tables with folders like mine saying, "Accuracy is leverage," and watching their shoulders drop as understanding replaced fear. On Sundays, I cooked. The children came with friends and sweethearts, and sometimes just their laundry. I taught Lila to knead dough and Theo to measure spices with the flat of a knife. Baby James learned to toddle between my knees and the oven, while I moved like a dancer, not because I was light, but because I knew the steps by heart. I heard from Daniel twice in those first months. The first was a letter, apologetic, but heavy with the kind of sorrow that asks to be absolved. I wrote back one sentence, "I wish you growth." The second was a knock on my door in late spring. He stood on the porch, hat in hand, as if manners could turn back time. "I'm sober," he said. I realized then how often I'd smelled bourbon and called it cologne. "I'm in a program. Step 9. Making amends," I said. "Yes." "I accept your apology," I said, "and I don't invite you in." He nodded, a man learning the shape of consequence in the language of boundaries. He turned and walked down the path I'd lined with lavender plugs just last week. For a long time after he left, the scent hung in the air, clean, purposeful. Margaret sent no letters. She married a man who liked novelty, as long as it glittered, and moved on when it dulled. The lien remained on her house for 2 years. She sold it low, angry at math, and told anyone who'd listen that I ruined her life. Perhaps I did, if ruin is what happens when a lie dissolves and you are left holding only the truth. The twist, if you need one, and stories always do, arrived not with police lights or a judge's gavel, but with a shoebox Anna found in the attic of our mother's old house when we prepared it for sale. Inside were letters bound with blue ribbon, our mother's handwriting, our father's too, and one from Margaret to a man whose name I did not recognize, dated the summer before my wedding. I read it twice, then a third time, to be certain. The affair had not begun last year, nor 10 years before. Margaret had circled my life since I was 20 with the hungry patience of someone who believes the universe owes her its beautiful things. Back then, the man was my first love, the boy I thought I'd marry before Daniel. He vanished that summer without explanation. In the letter, Margaret told him I wasn't serious about him, that I'd laughed about his cheap car, that I planned to break his heart before he could break mine. He left town the next week. I sat on the attic floor, old insulation itching my legs, and felt the architecture of my past shift. So many small losses I had folded into the story of growing up were in fact thefts. Not always of objects, sometimes of moments, of possibilities, of letters never delivered. Margaret was not content with my husband in the present. She had been stealing from my future since we were girls. I could have sent the letter to her with a note that said, "I see you now." I did not. I put the letters back, retied the ribbon, and saved the boy's address written in the corner. He ran a hardware store in a town 2 hours away, according to a quick search. On a soft Saturday, I drove there and walked the aisles, fingering garden twine and paintbrushes. A man with silver at his temples asked if I needed help. When he saw me, recognition flickered, then joy. Evelyn, he said, I thought you moved to the moon. We talked in the paint aisle for an hour while his teenage grandson ran the register and flirted with a girl buying bird seed. He had married and been widowed, raised 2 children. He had loved his life, he said, and yet he had wondered. I told him about the letter. He shook his head slowly, grief and humor mingling like tea and honey. I believed her because I was young and ashamed of my cheap car, he said. I could have asked you. We were children taught to doubt ourselves, I said. We learned to ask the wrong people for truth. We did not begin a romance in that aisle. Life is not a movie. We exchanged numbers and recipes, and later, grandkid stories. Sometimes we had coffee. Sometimes I drove home smiling because the universe contains second chances of a gentle sort, ones that don't replace the past but lay a soft cloth over it so you can rest your elbows without splinters. On the anniversary of the day Daniel left, Emily invited us all to her house for dinner. She lit candles that smelled like oranges, and Michael grilled fish like he'd been doing it his whole life. Anna stood to make a toast and, to my surprise, started to cry. I learned to listen this year, she said, not to noise, but to the quiet part of my heart that knows what is good. She turned to me. Mom, you taught me that by doing it. I swallowed the lump in my throat and held up my glass. To accurate timelines, I said, and they laughed because they know me. To choosing forward differently. Later, when the kitchen was a ruin of plates and contentment, I stepped onto the back porch alone. The night air was cool. Somewhere, a neighbor's television flickered blue against a wall. I thought of Margaret somewhere else under the same sky, and for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing sharp, just a quiet distance, like the space between stars that makes constellations possible. How could my own sister do this to me? The question that once kept me awake no longer required an answer. Some people break the ship they're given and then blame the sea. My work was to steer mine, damaged, repaired, stubborn, toward a harbor that felt like home. What they took from me was unforgivable. What I built afterward made forgiveness unnecessary. That is not vengeance. That is a life claimed. If you want the rest, the documents I kept, the exact motions Ruth filed, the simple budgeting sheet that saved me when fear scrambled numbers in my head, I've written it all down. But that belongs at a kitchen table with steam rising from mugs and a pencil between us. This is the part I wanted remembered. A woman in her 70s can outlast any storm built from lies. And when the wind finally dies, you should see what she plants.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting things.